in this, good, we've got the recording going, and the talk today is entitled, Who Are We? What Are We Doing? Where Are We Going? It's all yours, Guy.
Well, thank you, everyone, and greetings again. It's a huge, big topic, but I want to preface it by delving into the difficulties, because there's no question that a lot of people feel that we are at a time of crisis. The climate crisis is unrelenting. I have been working on the climate crisis issues for 25 years. It is only going to get worse until we make huge changes. On top of that, we have the crisis of collapsing biodiversity, of growing inequality, while the billionaires, are avoiding taxes and raking in phenomenally massive sums of money. We have an enormous housing crisis. Anyone who's on the rough side of the housing crisis knows whether you're trying to buy a house or renting and all the rents are going up, or you can't afford to rent or anything. And certainly in America, there's a crisis of democracy, when the Republican Party seems to be really quite happy to turn America into a sort of a neo-fascist state rather than keeping to the norms of democracy. I work full-time in the climate movement. And I know that if you haven't had that sinking feeling in your stomach, you haven't really understood how grim the climate crisis is. So I fully understand that Patty's granddaughter is going through a sense of, oh my goodness, this is, the more you read, it feels terrible. And this leads people to feel confused, to feel despair, to feel anger. And it makes us need to go to the bigger questions, like what is happening? What are we doing on this planet? Who are we? Where are we going? And as the last song suggested, that we are unraveling, I would disagree that we're unraveling. I think there's a much deeper story happening here, which is incredibly exciting. So to put this question in this context, about 6 years ago, I realized I needed to start understanding the economy. It's always intimidated me up to now. I studied economics part-time at university, and I felt it be confusing, I couldn't make any sense of it at all. So I dove in. And for 6 years, I've been researching and studying economics, and all those books you see over to this side here, I've read 350 books on economics and economic history and anthropology in the last 6 years. And I've been applying two minds to it. One is diagnosis and one is solutions. And the diagnosis part of it is like, you can't get any good remedy unless you have a good diagnosis to know what is wrong. And I've really dug my brain into this pretty seriously. And I've come up to the pretty solid conclusion that there are four fundamental causes of our troubles. The first goes back to our primate ancestors, where we inherited, from whom we've inherited an ancient impulse to dominate. Some people like to dominate. They like to be the alpha male or the alpha female. And when you combine that domination with a weakness of cultural or moral control, you get the worst of evils on the planet. We don't need to invoke any supernatural explanation for evil. It is the impulse to dominate without any cultural controls, which leads to genocide and slavery and Nazism and fascism. Excuse me a minute, I'm going to mute while I cough myself. And so that impulse to dominate, it shows up in our economic system. And our hunter-gatherer ancestors, who for 300,000 years, they discovered they did not like a bully in their ranks. And they learned how to suppress domination. They learned how to watch out for it. And if anyone showed signs of being a bully, they would use joking and teasing, and if need be, ostracism, and if need be, assassination, if you had a real nasty one among you. And they held on to that form of cooperation for 300,000 years. And it's only when a food surplus returned, whether through thousands of shellfish or a great surplus of hunting or agriculture, that the impulse to, we can keep something for my family a bit more. So some families got more wealthy. And then after a while, some of the wealthy families wanted to allow inheritance. And with inheritance, we then began to get inbred inequality and land ownership and conquest and all the stuff we've lived with for all our history. So the impulse to dominate is one of our four fundamental problems. And the solution to that is to suppress it and learn the methods of cooperation instead. We have a stronger impulse to cooperate. The second fundamental cause, and I've got to keep an eye on the time here, is modern economics, which is the neoclassical economics, which is basically teaching that all humans are fundamentally selfish and self-interested and super rational, always looking out for themselves. And the best way to grow an economy is to allow selfish people to make as much money as they want, and it'll all trickle down on the rest of us. And it's simply not true, because we're not fundamentally all selfish. Sometimes we're selfish, sometimes we're kind and cooperative. You know, we range in all sorts of things. And the economists started that school called neoclassical economics in the late 1900s out of a desire to believe that economics could be a science, and they would solve the world's problems through science. But economics is about us humans and our behavior. So it's not a science, it never will be a science. So changing economics so the book I'm writing is called The Economics of Kindness, a 10-year transition to a new ecological civilization, is the work, you know, that we have to tackle. The third fundamental cause is very simple. It's just ecological ignorance. We have cabinet ministers who can't explain what the carbon cycle is. We have, you know, CEOs who work on the oceans who don't understand the marine food chain. We have school principals who don't understand, you know, the microbiome of the gut and how different diet affects, you know, the health of the children. It's simple ecological ignorance, and we need to make Ecology 101 as fundamental as reading and writing and arithmetic and those things. The fourth fundamental cause is that our story has gone astray. So during the 1700s, in Europe, people embraced a new story based on the Enlightenment, which said that if we embrace science and technology and discovery, and, you know, we can use rationality to wash away the superstitions of the medieval age, we can then bring great progress to everyone. And behold, it worked. That story also contained within it permission for colonialism, for imperialism, for slavery, for domination. None of those things went away. But because it unleashed the power of science, unleashed innovation, and the ability to make a thing like this I can speak to someone in Australia with this, blow me down, without quantum theory, incredible mathematics. There's more science in this than there was on the first computers that helped people go to the moon in 1968, 69. And so that story is now telling us more about the downside of it, because that story contained nothing about loving the earth. It contained nothing about social justice. It contained nothing about appreciation for nature. And now we're seeing the downside, because this progress, more wealth, more economic growth, blah, 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 is leading us into all these terrible troubles. So we need a new story. And that brings me to the theme of who are we, what are we doing, where are we going? And the way I look at this will, for 2 minutes, let me delve into science a bit here, because strict scientific thinking says that we are material beings in a material world, and everything follows the law of entropy. In other words, everything will ultimately unravel and collapse. And we actually have no agency, because agency and consciousness are very uncomfortable for scientists. Truth is, we have consciousness, we have agency, we have choice. And throughout our existence, we've used that agency and choice to pull things together, not to disorganize, to make the life better for ourselves, to improve things. We're constantly working to do that. So rather than just being dominated by what the scientists call entropy, when everything gets disorganized, we're also guided by what I call, or what other people call, syntropy, the impulse to pull together, to organize, to make things better. And that comes through our spirit, through our consciousness. And so if you see this in perspective, and you look at that struggle between the impulse to dominate and the impulse to cooperate, and you can see that during the last 5,000 years, when we've had empires and goodness knows what, and economics based on the impulse to be self-interested and to dominate, leading to sort of all the nastiness of you know, greedy landlords, greedy factory owners, exploitation of nature by corporations. The flip side of that has been that the very market economy itself is cooperative. The desire to cooperate has always continued. And during the 1800s, people started cooperative workers' unions, cooperative banks, community currencies. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the economy based around cooperative ways of doing things. And cooperation allows us to express kindness and respect for each other. Whereas domination and intimidation doesn't. It suppresses that in favor of self-interest. So if you see this struggle going on between, do we operate on this planet as a dominating species, trying to bully everyone else and be the most self-important people, or as a cooperative species, trying to help each other collectively to build a beautiful world? the surveys show that 74% of people prefer the values of cooperation and helping each other. And about 26 prefer the values of status and self-importance and getting ahead for whatever reason. And during the 1930s, I mean, this decade is very similar to the 1930s in some ways. The great financial crash of 1929 was caused by, everyone getting greedy and gambling and this, that, and the other, and there was a great crash. The economists didn't understand how to remedy the economy. So the central bankers didn't understand the economics of kindness. So they withdrew money and everything. That caused the Great Depression. The Great Depression allowed Hitler to take the Nazis under control into the whole World War II and the whole Holocaust and everything like that. And you could argue that it all stems back to a failure to understand how to heal an economy when there's been a crash. We've since learned that at a time of crash, you pour money into the economy, you act out of kindness for those who are suffering. And our bankers call it quantitative easing and jargon like that. And they have been pouring money into the economy to ease COVID. But they could equally pour money into the economy to heal the climate crisis and to build affordable housing, by housing cooperatives, and by forms of housing which would eliminate the concept of rent entirely. We can eliminate the whole concept of rent and homelessness within 10 years if we really put our minds to it. In Sweden, they built that much housing during the 1970s. So now we're in a similar time of economic crisis. There's a massive amount of debt out there, plus the big climate crisis out there. And when there's a crisis, people who don't understand all this stuff about economics, they go to fear, they feel confused. And some people, their first nature is to go to their clan. Oh, well, let's go back to being a white person or, being to a fundamentalist Christian, whatever my clan is, and then to the other people and sort of try them. And that leads us to some pretty dark places, especially when it's mixed with self-importance and the impulse to dominate. That's how you get fascist bullies coming on the scene. So in this time, our choice now is to really work and get engaged, to revert to the true story, which is we are building a cooperative world. We're learning to work together as nations of this planet. We're learning to heal our planet. We're learning to overcome the climate crisis. We're learning to heal biodiversity, all that stuff. I spent 2 or 3 years writing this novel called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, which is set in the year 2032, when we're already doing all this stuff, to give people hope that we can do this, we can do this. But the 2020s, this is the most critical decade. And we all need to ask ourselves, what role can I play in this? How can I get engaged? And it's different for every one of us because we all have different loves and desires, but this is a plea, please find some way to get involved. The most critical piece is the climate crisis because it poses an existential threat to all existence on Earth if the temperature gets out of control, and it's already heading that way. And so, I've formed an initiative called the Community Climate Circles, when we're encouraging people to meet together in circles to talk about the climate crisis and to think, what can I do with my lifestyle? Am I still burning gas at home? Do I still have a gasoline car? Can I eat less meat? Just what can I do personally? And then what can our neighbors do? And could the capital Unitarians have an initiative to encourage every person to sort of form a climate circle, and so we can eliminate our own climate pollution that we're causing inadvertently? It's not a matter of blame. I still have a gas cooker in the house. I drove a gasoline car for years and years and years. I only turned vegan 2 years ago, though I was vegetarian for a long time before that. But at a time of crisis like this, Patty, if you tell your granddaughter, the only real known solution for real concern around the environment is to get involved with a group, whether it's a student group or a local environmental group. There are many in Victoria. I lived in Victoria for 25 years. When I lived there were 155 environmental nonprofits, all doing different things, really. And these are really good people who are committed to make a difference. So I'll wind up now by just quoting a little piece from the opening of my book, which says, our world needs more kindness. People need more kindness. Nature needs more kindness. But we need it deep within our economies, where so many of our troubles begin. We've been told 1,000 times that the free market economy is the best and indeed the only kind of economy that works. But surely there must be a better way. I'm not writing for the cynics or the doomers. I'm writing for all who hold faith that a world without climate chaos, without poverty, without homelessness, without hatred, without racism, without reckless capitalism, war, and the constant abuse of nature is possible. I'm of one mind with Sergio Fajardo, the former mayor of the city of Medellin. in Colombia and his colleague Alexandro Echeverria, when they were working to transform their city from a haven for illegal drugs and a hell of violence into the civic wonder it has since become. And this was their belief, that pessimism is an indulgence, that orthodoxy is the enemy of innovation, and that despair is an insult to the imagination. So with those thoughts, I'll thank you for giving me this opportunity to share thoughts from my heart with you and to enjoy this wonderful time together. And I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.